Before we start, please make sure to subscribe to our channel to get more videos like this one. For more related video, especially a preparation like this one, check the description box below. Now let's start.
Now, listen carefully to each question and choose the best answer. If you need more time, especially for the longer questions, pause the video and take your time. You can also ask, in the comment, for the full PDF transcript of this video. Now let's start. Read the following paragraph and answer the question. Over the past decade, interest in cybersecurity has increased as the number of cyber attacks on government administrations networks, water regulation systems, and power plants targeting system applications rises. Binti has been asked to address an audience on the topic of cybersecurity. She has read different articles and reports and arrived at the following conclusions. If kept up to date, older professional software is less vulnerable than the latest software. Unstable internet connections make it more difficult to quickly detect cyber attacks. Internet-accessible system applications are difficult to hack if the right protocols are followed. People often do not follow the protocols. However, most violations of the protocols are unintentional. People violate the protocols more often at work than at home. Mobile applications that enable access to system applications are difficult to hack. Organizations that have received mandatory cybersecurity training are 15 times less vulnerable to hackers than organizations that have not received such training. Which one of the following recommendations has the biggest positive impact on cybersecurity? Select 1. Discourage people from working from home using an internet connection. Heavily sanction people who intentionally violate protocols. Invest in a stable internet connection. Provide employees with mobile devices. Read each passage and answer the question that follows. A polling station in voting District Z of the province of Merveria has made an allegation that a police unit intimidated voters on election day. There are 3 voting districts, X, Y, and Z, and 5 police units based in the province, identified as units A, B, C, D, and E. Marchin is trying to determine which police unit was in District Z on election day and has the following information on police activities on that day. There was only 1 police unit in District X. 3 police units were in District Y. Unit D was the only police unit in District X. Units D and E were not in the same district. Units B and C were in a different district from Unit A. Which 3 items of information does Marchin need to confirm which police unit was in District Z? Select 1. Items 1, 4, and 5. Items 1, 2, and 5. Items 2, 3, and 4. Items 2, 3, and 5. Read the question below and select the best answer. Research into post-conflict nations in 1980 concluded that nations were less likely to lapse back into states of conflict if steady development aid were provided directly to governments, as opposed to direct intervention which aims to impose solutions on local populations. As a result of this research, most donor nations shifted their funding models from direct intervention to national-level financial aid. In 2010, however, researchers found that post-conflict nations, on average, were worse off than they had been before 1980 despite there having been no increase in overall levels of reported government corruption. Which of the following, if true, best resolves the contradiction in the research finding in the above passage? Select 1. On average, donor nations tended to provide variable or sporadic development aid. Government corruption meant that only a portion of aid was ever used as intended. There were more post-conflict countries in 2010 than there were in 1980. The post-conflict development agenda had changed significantly by 2010. Read the question below and select the best answer. Seren is working for a peacekeeping mission that has experienced conflicts between different rebel groups. The mission aims to serve as an impartial mediator of the conflict through meetings. Today, Seren has been informed that a group of 5 people, Tomoka, Umar, Vassar, Jacob, and Asoku, who are the key members of the 2 rebel groups, the Kiki and the Mimi, will visit her to discuss their concerns. Seren needs to know which rebel group each visitor belongs to before the meeting. However, She has only the following information. Umar and Asoku belong to different rebel groups. Tomoka and Jacob belong to the same rebel group. Vassar and Umar don't belong to the Kiki. Accordingly, which of the following would definitely be an incorrect assumption that Seren should avoid? Select 1. Umar, Mimi. Jacob, Mimi. Soku, Kiki. Vassar, Mimi. Read the question below and select the best answer. Tony is preparing a presentation that he is going to give to colleagues entitled, The Future of Addressing Refugee Crises. At the end of his presentation, Tony will make recommendations. Read what Tony is going to say about the roles of the state and of private enterprise and decide which recommendation would be most consistent with what he says earlier. Historically, the three main durable solutions to a refugee crisis, resettlement, repatriation, and local integration, have all been about reintegrating refugees into a state. Increasingly, however, the private sector is playing a role. Recently, the IKEA Foundation, for example, gave the largest private sector grant in the history of the United Nations to UNHCR, donating 110 million euros. Other multinational corporations are also increasingly engaging with the work of UNHCR. Private enterprise can mobilize resources almost instantly compared with most state entities. However, it would only take one case of serious exploitation to discredit the potential role of business and undermine its potential contribution to refugee protection. On the basis of what he plans to say during his presentation, which recommendation should Tony make at the end of it? Select 1. States should not be considered solely responsible for protecting the human rights of refugees under all circumstances. States and the international community should be the first to address refugee crises. Private sector corporations should be encouraged to lead efforts to address refugee crises. Clear ethical rules and principles should be in place to guide private sector engagement with refugee assistance. Read the following paragraph and answer the question. Submission by the Mayor of Castelfoy. It is our assertion that it is inappropriate to have unarmed police officers serving on the streets of Castelfoy and is contrary to our traditional policing expectations and practices. It also puts unarmed officers at greater risk of harm than their armed counterparts. A review of data on aggression towards police officers shows that, in the post-conflict turmoil, police officers face on average 112 potentially violent interactions every month. Typically, 38 of those result in actual violence. They, in turn, lead to a minor injury to a police officer in 32% of cases and more significant harm in 4% of cases. Furthermore, these data show that an unarmed officer will receive a minor injury in 41% of these cases and significant harm in 6%. We deem it unacceptable to put our unarmed officers at this kind of risk and conclude that the increase in the chance of harm to an unarmed police officer is intolerable. Which one of the following facts would strengthen the argument described in the passage above? Select 1. 63% of potentially violent interactions involving unarmed police officers ended in actual violence. In Castelfoy, unarmed police officers are given more negotiation training than their armed colleagues. 13% of the incidents of significant harm inflicted on unarmed police officers lead to a permanent disability. Studies show that armed officers feel more confident about dealing with potentially violent interactions than their unarmed counterparts. Read the following paragraph and answer the question. During a meeting, political affairs officers discussed the situation in the region of Pulmer. In this region, tension exists between three groups: the Tubram, the Martuk, and the Pravit. One of the officers said that the different groups accused each other of being corrupt. These mutual accusations do not have objective grounds, since research has shown that the prevalence of corruption in the three subgroups is proportionally the same. Subsequently, the officers looked at the following graphs. Based on these graphs, what would be the best conclusion to draw? Select 1. The Martuk are overrepresented in convictions for corruption. The Pravit were underrepresented in convictions for corruption 50 years ago, but are currently overrepresented. Since the 1990s, the population subgroups have been equally represented in convictions. This is a correct representation of the equal prevalence of corruption. The Tubram were underrepresented in convictions for corruption 50 years ago, but are currently overrepresented. Which of the following would be a reasonable conclusion for NICE to make from the figures above? Select 1. Annual increases in safety and security funding corresponded with increases in protection funding in the following year. There was an inverse relationship between funding for economic recovery and infrastructure and funding for safety and security. Annual increases in landmine action funding corresponded with reduced funding for all other sectors during the same year. There was an inverse relationship between funding for economic recovery and infrastructure and funding for landmine action. Read each passage and answer the question that follows. Chief Inspector Tanaka is planning police patrols in the region of Marisburg. Her unit has 40 officers, 20 of whom are female. To improve planning, she consults the following analysis of data collected during previous patrols in the region. Recent data gathered on the policing operations in post-conflict operations in Marisburg suggest that gender has an effect on responses from the local population. The presence of female police officers generally reduces hostility towards police patrols. The higher the proportion of females in the patrol, the more marked the effect. In rural areas, older local males are less likely to cooperate with directions given directly by a female or young male police officer than those given by an older male colleague. This effect appears to be more extreme at night. Female officers have been found to be far more effective when gathering evidence from female witnesses. Assuming that the results of the analysis have been thoroughly replicated and are in fact true, which of the following would be the most reasonable way for Chief Inspector Tanaka to plan the police patrols? Select 1. Ensure that all patrols have a mix of male and female police officers. Ensure that all patrols have more male than female police officers. Have all male patrols in rural areas and at night but otherwise have mixed patrols. Have some patrols that are mixed gender and some that are entirely female. Which of the following would be a valid conclusion that Yang can draw? Online voting is more likely to be used by Select 1. More educated voters in country B, but not in country A. Wealthier voters in country A, but not in country B. Wealthier voters in country B, but not in country A. More educated voters in country A, but not in country B. Read the following paragraph and answer the question. Submission by the Mayor of Castelfoy. It is our assertion that it is inappropriate to have unarmed police officers serving on the streets of Castelfoy and is contrary to our traditional policing expectations and practices. It also puts unarmed officers at greater risk of harm than their armed counterparts. A review of data on aggression towards police officers shows that, in the post-conflict turmoil, police officers face on average 112 potentially violent interactions every month. Typically, 38 of those result in actual violence. They, in turn, lead to a minor injury to a police officer in 32% of cases and more significant harm in 4% of cases. Furthermore, these data show that an unarmed officer will receive a minor injury in 41% of these cases and significant harm in 6%. We deem it unacceptable to put our unarmed officers at this kind of risk and conclude that the increase in the chance of harm to an unarmed police officer is intolerable. Which one of the following facts would strengthen the argument described in the passage above? Select 1. 63% of potentially violent interactions involving unarmed police officers ended in actual violence. In Castelfoy, unarmed police officers are given more negotiation training than their armed colleagues. Read the following paragraph and answer the question. Sue works as a corrections officer in Para, a post-conflict country that is experiencing violence among three major ethnic groups: Arnstown, Buleti, and Cedars. At present, the level of violence inflicted by prison officers against prisoners is a cause for concern. There are 4 established prisons in Para. In prisons 1, 2, and 3, it is reported that about 20% of a random representative sample of prisoners experience abuse. This figure is much higher in prison 4, reaching levels as high as 55%. While the first 3 prisons have prisoners and prison officers from the same ethnic group, Prison 4 is a mixed ethnic prison with at least 70% of prisoners originating from the Cedars region. Su concludes that the violence against prisoners by prison officers in Prison 4 had an ethnic basis, specifically targeting those from the Cedars region. Which of the following would best support Su's conclusion? Select 1. From Buleti and Cedars. From Arnstown and Buleti. In equal parts from all 3 regions. From Arnstown and Cedars. Which one of Kim's conclusion is correct given the data presented in the above table? Select 1. The number of onsets of violent events rose over the period considered. From the 1960s onwards, there was a steady increase in the number of onsets of violence in countries with a previous conflict. The proportion of countries with a previous conflict rose over the period considered. There were 33 instances of onsets of violence in countries with no previous conflict during the 1990s. Seren is working for a peacekeeping mission that has experienced conflicts between different rebel groups. The mission aims to serve as an impartial mediator of the conflict through meetings. Today, Seren has been informed that a group of 5 people, Tomoka, Umar, Vassar, Jacob, and Asoku, who are the key members of the 2 rebel groups, the Kiki and the Mimi, will visit her to discuss their concerns. Seren needs to know which rebel group each visitor belongs to before the meeting. However, she has only the following information. Umar and Asoku belong to different rebel groups. Tomoka and Jacob belong to the same rebel group. Vassar and Umar don't belong to the Kiki. Accordingly, which of the following would definitely be an incorrect assumption that Seren should avoid? Select 1. Umar, Mimi. Jacob, Mimi. Soku, Kiki. Vassar, Mimi. Read the question below and select the best answer. Kaneka's manager has asked him to assess whether there will be sufficient parliamentary support for a proposed legislation for judicial reform. Kaneka knows that the 4 political parties, the Blues, the Greens, the Reds, and the Yellows, are waiting for the results of a recent public opinion poll on the judiciary before deciding how to vote. Kaneka has been asked to determine how many parties will vote for the legislation if the poll results are negative. He knows the following information. The Yellows will vote against the legislation if the poll results are negative. If the results are neutral or positive, they will vote for it. If the poll results are positive, the Blues will abstain. Otherwise, they will vote against the legislation. The Reds will abstain if the poll results are negative. Otherwise, they will vote for it. The Greens will vote against the legislation if the Yellows vote for it. Otherwise, they will vote the same way as the Blues. From the information that Kaneka has, how many parties will vote for the legislation if the poll results are negative? Select 1, none, 2, 3. Read the question below and select the best answer. An impeccable logic makes arms embargoes a potentially powerful instrument in the array of United Nations peace and security building mechanisms. By denying aggressors and human rights abusers the implements of war and repression, arms embargoes contribute directly to preventing and reducing the level of armed conflict. There could hardly be a more appropriate tool for international peacemaking. Moreover, in constricting the supply of only specific weapons and military-related goods and services, and in denying them to ruling elites, their armies and other violent combatants, arms embargoes constitute the best example of a smart sanction. Not only do arms embargoes avoid doing harm to vulnerable and innocent civilian populations, but the better the embargo's enforcement, the more innocent lives are likely to be saved. Which of the following is an underlying assumption of the main argument? Select 1. Can target rebel movements fighting against a legitimate government. Require the successful accumulation of appropriate information. Are the most beneficial form of sanction if imposed properly. Are best applied against governments posing a threat to civilian populations. Check the description box for more videos. Please make sure to subscribe to our channel so you can get more videos like this one. You can also ask, in the comment, for the full PDF version of videos to help you to prepare and to accomplish successfully your next assessment test. Thank you and see you next time.